Hello, everyone. Welcome to Resounding Visions. My name is Misael Diaz. I'm an assistant professor of art, media, and design at Cal State Marcos. I'm the instructor of AMD 368, Art of World Cultures, which is one of the courses that will be hosting the Resounding Visions speaker series throughout the semester. On behalf of the Resounding Visions curatorial team, which also includes AMD professor Christine Diekman, and AMD faculty instructors Ana Luisa Petrishko and Jeffrey Ray, we wanted to begin today's presentation with a land acknowledgement. I would like to acknowledge that I'll be speaking tonight from the unceded territory of the Kumeyaay peoples, and that the meeting place of CSUSM and its surrounding areas is still home to the 6 federally recognized bands of the La Jolla, Pala, Pama, Pechanga, Rincon, Soboboliseño, Coyamcowicham people. I'd like to take this moment to acknowledge and express our appreciation and respect for those groups whose homelands we reside and learn on, recognizing that they are stewards of this land from time immemorial, in spite of the ongoing violence of settler colonialism. Given that we're not all together for this session, I invite you to look into whose ancestral homelands you reside on by consulting the resources that I'll be sharing in the chat as a first step in recognizing the resilience and strength of Indigenous communities and expressing solidarity with efforts to undo their intentional erasure. So here are some of those resources now for you to consult if you haven't done so previously, along with another resource toolkit that has been prepared by CSUSM's California Indian Culture and Sovereignty Center, which delves a little bit further into land acknowledgements and the importance of continuing this practice of recognition. Welcome, everybody. This is our third session of the spring 2022 session of Resounding Visions. This is a year-long series hosting Black, Indigenous, and people of color artists, musicians, and scholars who are working at the intersection of sound and art to explore forms of cultural resistance and affirmation. I wanted to extend a very special thank you to Steve and Laura Wagner and the Epstein Family Foundation for the generous funding that makes these events possible. And I also want to thank the School of Art staff, especially Albert Rascon, for their continued support as part of every one of these sessions. Before introducing today's guest speakers and passing on the mic to them, I wanted to let you all know that in lieu of using the chat to share questions and our comments with our presenter, we ask that you please use the Q&A function. We're going to be closing down the chat function shortly, so if you have any questions or comments, please type those into the Q&A, and we'll be happy to address those after the presentation. The presentation by tonight's speaker, Super Futures Haunt Collective, will last approximately 45 minutes, and afterwards we'll be opening it up for questions and comments. So again, please use the Q&A function to share your thoughts, to share your questions, and we'll get to those after the presentation. Now it is my pleasure to introduce our guest speakers for tonight, Super Futures Haunt Collective. Super Futures Haunt Collective, or SFHQ, is an art and research-based collaboration between 3 avatars: SFAOW, Specularity, Fugitive, Alterity, or whatever; Agent O, and Lady How, Haunting or whatever. In the terrestrial forms, SFHQ members F. Jung is a sky person and urban planner in New York. C. Ree is an artist and folk programmer based in California and has only once been visited by Our Lady. Angie Morrill holds a Ph.D. in ethnic studies from University of California, San Diego, and is a shut-in cat lady who paints pictures for money. And she's also the director of the Indian education program for the Portland School District. SFHQ shares a theoretical and visceral relationship to haunting as a decolonial and inevitable response to the violence of colonialism. SFHQ also shares an affective, life-generating bond rooted in love that affirms our own existence and those of all people, that impels us to look for, create, and demand more ethical futures not yet here. They have exhibited their work at the Museum of Contemporary Art San Diego, San Diego Art Institute, the Santa Cruz Museum of Art and History, the Alice Gallery in Seattle, and Seattle's Wing Luke Museum. In 2019, SFHQ also participated in the Yeehaw show Lifting the Sky, the inaugural exhibition of King Street Station Gallery in Seattle, which featured over 200 Indigenous artists from across the Pacific Northwest and British Columbia. And I believe they also have an upcoming show at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Tucson. We're very, very excited to have them joining us tonight. So please welcome Super Futures Haunt Collective.
Thank you so much for having us. We're so excited to be here and talk about our work with your students and all of you. So I'm Angie, also known as Lady How. I also had dental surgery today, so I'm going to be talking a little at the beginning, but then I'm going to be passing it off to Sam and Ree. Do you guys want to introduce yourselves?
Yeah, my name is Christina Ree. My avatar in this collective is Agent O. So excited to be here. Thank you for having us. And thank you, Taeyang, for being Taeyang and opening us up, warming the space.
He is the sun.
Hi, everybody. I'm Sam. It's good to be connected here. My avatar is specularity, fugitive alterity, or whatever.
Okay, cool. So I'm going to start by talking about our origin story. You've heard a little bit about it, but we just thought we'd give you, some details, like how do people end up in an art collective? The three of us live in three different places. We have a lot of different uh, talents and specialties, but at one time, Sam and I were both students at the University of California, San Diego, during a really intense time. We call it Black Winter, and so I got to know Sam, and one of our professors in my dissertation chair was also Ree's partner, Wayne. And Wayne's nothing if not about the fam. And so he made sure that we got to know Christina, who was working on her show. She was getting her MFA, and she had a senior thesis show. And Sam and I were lucky enough to be able to visit and help set up some of those polls and stuff. And but this is really the beginning of everything, Agent O and Reed's show. So Reed, do you want to talk a little bit about it?
Yeah. So I was in an MFA art program at UC Irvine, which is awesome. I highly recommend everyone consider it if they want to continue in art. And I got really interested in psychics after someone told me that Vietnamese women are the best psychics. And it really got my brain, my wheels turning. I started interviewing middle-aged Asian women psychics, both in the US, but also abroad, and started to consider how maybe, psychic powers, or what we are not familiar with as kind of rational Western knowledge, might be constructed through war, through gender, through age. And at the same time, I was also watching a lot of Japanese horror films, and reading a lot about theory on Asian horror films, and started to think about those two things together. And I created this series of work. This is from my thesis show, called Dark Waters. And what Dark Waters does is it creates a false ceiling. You know how in every grocery store and every office building, there are those gross, cheap, false ceilings, suspended ceilings? Well, I constructed a false ceiling that was slowly leaking, so much so that people would come to the gallery and they would actually call, facilities, because they're like, you should know the gallery is leaking. And so this kind of misrecognition between what is real and what might actually be a haunting or a horror was really of interest to me, and finding that intersection about what horror movies are usually about, sort of like an original violence, kind of an original crime that has not yet been resolved. And thinking about kind of modernism and Western society and settler colonialism, and combining that with this avatar I created, Agent O. So Agent O is an amalgamation of these middle-aged women, Asians, transnational psychics, cyclops, a lot of myths. And in the middle of the show, usually at night, she'll come and just sort of destroy shit, like fuck shit up, and nobody knows why. And part of her opacity, basically, her purpose is not that legible, is kind of an act of refusal. This is sort of going along the lines of maybe Otter Simpson's ideas of refusal. We're not supposed to know. We can't know, and that's part of her power. And also, yeah. So I guess that's one of the things that's important to Agent O, and this idea that, people always talk about justice, but there's also this Agent O is motivated by revenge. And instead of righting the wrongs, she goes around and tries to wrong the wrongs. So wronging the wrongs is very much part of her DNA.
Thank you. So many years went by, like 4 or 5 years, and Sam was in Southern California, and he was hanging out with Rhea and Wayne, and he said, do you think we should ask Angie to be in an art collective with us? And I have to say that if somebody asks you to be in an art collective, you should absolutely say yes. I didn't know what it would look like, but when I got the phone call, I was like completely in. Spending time with two people that I never ever could see enough of, talking about these ideas that make me want to live. My excuse me, my dissertation was a lot about Native feminist methodologies, but haunting and Avery Gordon's work were such a huge part of my thinking. And so I really wanted to explore haunting as methodology. And so we got together and we talked about what that might look like. Here's a visitation. So what we do are visitations. Excuse me, when we appear together, we call that a visitation. And and one of the ways that we appear together is that we travel through the specularity. We become in relationship to each other and to other specters and non-human kin in the specularity. This picture on the left, or I don't know if it's on your right or left. Excuse me, I should have gotten some water. Oops. Is called Watches Over Us, and it's a painting that my mom made for me for my birthday the year before she passed. And that's her family, her mom and her brothers and sisters sitting on a blanket, and behind them are ancestors, ghosts. When my sister died suddenly, Ree and Sam and Wayne and we all got together in Oregon and went to visit my family, and we decided to do a reenactment. And in the reenactment, I really apologize. It's more than just a comment on the first painting, because it's also saying that, like, although many of those people on the blanket are gone, and many of the people, well, several of the people who are on that blanket are also gone now, that we are in relation to each other because of love, that we, through that love, point towards futures, as Miss Ale mentioned, not yet in existence. And for my part, I think that haunting and all its complexities is something that we always go back to. Agent O is up for revenge, but sometimes the hauntings are just to share space. And sometimes there's a go shopping. Good. Did I cover everything, you guys?
I think so. So thanks for that, Angie. I think before we go into our work in particular, we just wanted to open up with this quote because I feel like it really encapsulates some of what we do and our provocations to you all. I'll just read it to you. Resist that which makes me a ghost and you a monster. Resist that which makes us living dead. Come and make an avatar, a host that will be your shelter while you make a new geography. I love that part of us that is always already before dispossession. There is nothing that is ruined that can't be given up or taken back. Let's wrap ourselves around each other, at least. And that is a quote from one of our articles called Before Dispossession or Surviving It. So why avatars? As mentioned before by Ree, Agent O was this avatar that referenced a lot of myths like Cyclops, psychics, that were grappling and made of war and violence. And she time travels as well. And so, Angie and I were thinking that if we wanted to be with Agent O, we had to become avatars as well. And so, aside from Agent O, like we mentioned earlier, Angie's avatar is Lady Howe, haunting or whatever. And my avatar is SFHQ or specularity, fugitive, alterity, or whatever. And we each embody a different political and material approach to reckoning with historical violence. So as Ree mentioned before, Agent O is really about revenge, refusal, and opacity, and believes in wronging the wrongs. And Lady Howe is really motivated and inspired by haunting and love, relations, presence, and mothering, and really informed by Indigenous feminism. And SFHQ is about fugitivity, waywardness, loss is generative, and really is rooted in queer of color critique. And our avatars and the theories that really describe their ways of reckoning with violence are really in conversations with works that you might be familiar with, like Angie mentioned Avery Gordon, also C.D.A. Hartman and Fred Moten, which is all to say that we have a great debt to Black radical thought in particular and Indigenous feminism generally.
So along with avatars, one of the kind of key things that we do as a group is something we call visitations. We don't call what we do hauntings, partly because hauntings has a very specific meaning. What we do are called visitations. So we show up and we are from the future as well as the past. We do call ourselves future ghosts. For us, temporality is all at once. So visitations function like a haunting, but since they're also from the future, you know how kind of a brush with the future functions like a question mark or an exclamation point sometimes. So both a proposition, but also a provocation. They sort of, we also are not just about haunting oppressors, we're also visiting our future children and our future children's future homelands. Visitations are another way for us to say we refuse to say stay gone. Sometimes they function like a middle finger. Sometimes they're a finger pointing to the sky. Oftentimes, I think the visitations mean there's an ongoing journey and we are arriving together with a purpose, even if that purpose is not so loaded by harm or trauma. Sometimes the purpose is very minor or leisurely shopping or gossip. So as a result, you may see us in places like fast fashion or luxury hotels or sticky pick booths or coastal isolation. And oftentimes what we're doing is speaking to the simultaneous presence of indigeneity and militarism, but also to how haunting is very, very present tense. It's very active, it's very visceral, it's very lived and material. It's very much all around us at all times, every day. So we are about to try something for the very, 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 very first time. And you are all going to be promoted. You're all going to be promoted to panelists so that we can all see each other and do this together. This is something we're going to call sonic specularity. And what we wanted to do was do an activity that sort of invokes one of our methods in a project we're going to talk about later, where we presence kin, we share breath. It's a call and response. We're going to create a shared sonic space, what we're going to call a sonic specularity. So for now, what I'd like you to do is choose someone, a place or a non-human, a moment that you want to acknowledge at this moment in time. So take take a few seconds to do that. It doesn't have to be too perfect. It can be a beloved ancestor. It can be a K-pop idol. It can be a longtime companion, human or non-human. It could also be a time period like these past COVID years. It could be your sense of grief. So bring that presence into your heart and your mind. And also, before I continue, I should say this was inspired by the Black feminist Alexis Pauline Gumbs, who does something very similar. All right. So hopefully you all have that presence in your mind, in your heart. Now, imagine a sound or sounds for this presence. This is your creative act. It can be guttural, it can be a word, it can be something very odd. Now with audio off, I'd like you to practice the sound by yourself. So there's a few creative decisions, because in a minute, I'm gonna ask you we're gonna all collectively do the sound. So you have to decide, how long do you wanna draw out the sound? Is it the space of a breath? Will it modulate? So modulating meaning like, hello. Whoa. Will there be silences between your repetitions? How loud will it be? Will it be soft or loud? And each time you repeat it, it will be the same, second, third, or fourth time. So let's take a moment for you to create your sound. And in a few seconds, we are all going to join each other in Zoom space. We'll give it about 10 more seconds. You can practice your sound in the privacy of your Zoom room. And Albert is going to do some fast fingers and get us all together in the same space. And we're going to do this together. We're making art, y'all. All right, Albert, let's do this. All right. So everybody, please turn your video on and your audio on. I know this is terrifying. We're all in this together. We're only going to do this for about 20 seconds, so don't worry too much about it, but please turn your videos on and your audios.
All right, so I think
Maybe they can't.
I think Albert is moving
Okay.
moving on adding folks.
Thank you, Albert. Hi, Bethany.
So this will give us a little bit more chance to think about and practice. Think about channeling. See some folks joining.
Britt, I love your background and your hair.
This is so cool, by the way.
It's good to see you guys.
And thanks for doing something different. It's awesome. I love that you didn't know it was going to happen too. That's really cool.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see. This could be a
Yeah.
And poor Albert is doing all the work, madly promoting everyone.
I'm at the J's.
So I see in the Q&A that some folks are just having trouble turning on their camera and their audio, and that's because Albert has yet to promote you. So give it a little bit of a sec. You should be promoted and then have access to turn on your audio and camera.
I feel like seeing everyone, we can actually breathe. It's like, oh, I know who we're talking to. I want to find those Taeyong fans and give you a high five.
All right. He's so good.
So good.
And you guys know he wasn't really that talented. He worked hard. We watched a documentary about it because we love him so much. They're like, really wasn't that talented. He has the ability to work very hard.
We are actually planning on doing some future projects with Taeyang. He just doesn't know it, but he's going to be there. All right, so while we wait, warm up your vocal cords. Think about your sound and how you'd like to repeat it.
Yeah, so maybe leave yourself on mute. You can start practicing.
You can start practicing on mute. It's gonna be a pretty brief exercise, but the cool thing is SFHQ, this is how Sam, Angie, and I actually get shit done. Like we have to do it all over Zoom and it's all speculative on some level. We try things out for the first time. And then if we're lucky, we get to meet IRL and see if it really lands. We are gonna try a sound piece inspired by actually preparing for tonight. We have been thinking a lot about sound and it's inspired new projects, which has been really great. So thank you so much. Oh, poor Albert.
It's so nice to see everyone though. We never get
really
to see individuals' faces as part of these presentations. So
it is.
Everyone's famous
I think
now.
this should always be like mandatory. I'm just saying, but that's just me.
If you have not been promoted and you want to be, just raise your hand so I can see you. This is Albert.
Yeah, so Albert, I see that there's some folks raising their hands. All right, so Albert's targeting those that are most anxious first.
While Albert is busy, I can mention a little bit. After this exercise, we are going to talk about a piece that takes place in the specularity. And Angie will explain a little bit more about what the specularity means to us, but it is a space of encounter. And it's also a space where we presence kin, and we all sort of exchange and exist together. And so all the people that you would like, or presences that you're acknowledging tonight, through this activity, we are going to see what it's like to be in the same space together. And this space is going to exist through sound and also through Zoom. And we will be making it work. And maybe Misael, we can post that piece later.
Definitely. So I think Albert's almost done. And I think the other thing that I don't know if
that's it. That's everybody.
I don't know if this was mentioned, but there was also if you turn on your gallery view, right? That's a component of it.
Yes.
So you should all now have a chance to also alter the view. So if you turn on gallery view, you'll have a sense of everyone who's going to be participating.
All right. So here we go, y'all. We're gonna do this together. New territory. If your first name begins with A through M, you are gonna be in the first round of sound making. And if your first name is N through Z, you will be in the group called the listeners. And after 10 seconds, we're gonna switch. And then we'd love to hear your feedback in the chat, how it was for you to be a sound maker and how it was for you to be a listener. So what we'd like you to do is for 10 seconds, we're gonna make our sounds. And this includes SFHQs. So I'm in the A through M group, as is Angie. So if you can all turn on your mics, it's gonna be a cacophony.
Maybe
And
lower your volume.
Listeners, please let us know what it feels like, knowing that everyone is invoking a presence into this space. All right, 3, 2, 1, go.
Okay, no, Father, I'm not okay. Father, I'm not okay.
Okay, I did cut it short to 5 seconds because I realized we're a little bit behind time, but now we're gonna switch roles. If you are group N through Z, you are now the sound makers, and A through M, first names A through M, we are the listeners. So N through Z, ready? 3, 2, 1, go.
Mm.
Okay. We didn't make it to 5 seconds, but that was great. Thank you so much for participating in that. If the next part of this is just to put in the chat what came up for you when you listened and what came up for you when you made sounds, we're dying to know. And while people put that into the chat, we'll just continue talking about why we did this. So what we did just did was channel a presence. We brought all these different presences into the same space together. It's the motivation for the next piece that Angie will talk about, and the space that we call the specularity. Thanks, everyone.
I loved it. Yeah. Thank you so much for being so willing to play with us. It's being an art collective is a blast.
So did we lose Angie?
Angie, are you there? Oh no.
I think her connection might have dropped out.
Oh no, okay. Well, while Angie, yeah.
I think it was my bad.
I can talk a little bit about.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Go for it, Angie.
Oh, good. Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, it just started kicking me off. So I just wanted to say, so this is a piece we did, Visitation from Chilliquin to Seattle. It started with this idea of the last Indian, that there's always this last Indian, the final Indian. And we wanted to engage with Edward Curtis's works, which were being displayed at the Seattle Art Museum. He was a famous ethnographer who was hired to create portraits of last Indians. Their portraits are very famous. They're not very authentic because they're he dressed people up and had them wear regalia when they weren't wearing regalia and so forth. And one of the first pictures he took was of Princess Angeline, whose real name was Kiki Soblu, and she was the daughter of Chief Seattle. And then when the Duwamish were moved from Seattle, she stayed behind, and she created baskets. And I also had a relative who was supposedly the last, Fanny Ball, and I wrote about her in my dissertation because I think that oftentimes we're asked to find the truth, and I'm more interested in looking at the story. Like, what is the story? So the story was that when the Modoc War happened and 5 of the Modoc were hanged, including one of my relatives, Keemposh Captain Jack, and then they were all shipped to Oklahoma, where they died, many of them. So now there's a Modoc tribe of Oklahoma, and there's also the Klamath tribes, which are the Modoc and the Klamath and the Uskin Band of Snake Indians in southern Oregon, and that's the tribe that I belong to. When Fanny Ball was on her deathbed, she called her family to her and said, "I'm not who you think I am," which it really is. So, like, our communities are so small, it's hard to actually put that together, but I'm just interested in telling the story that and thinking about the possibilities. And so in this piece, which we're going to play for you, Fanny Ball travels through the specularity to visit Kiki Soblu, last to the last. We're going to play it for you, and then we'll hear what you think, I guess. Visitation from Chiloquin to Seattle via the specularity. I was a daughter. I was born. I was the daughter of one of those chiefs, the kind that don't die of old age. Keemposh was hanged, he was hunted and imprisoned. He was judged and he was hanged. His wife and youngest daughter were removed from Oregon with the rest of the Modocs after the war, after he killed General Canby. They became Modocs in Oklahoma, the ones that didn't die. I stayed behind with the Klamath and hid in plain sight. No one told my secret. Not even my children knew who I really was. I was a ghost. Kiki Soblu, she haunts Seattle. She haunted settled Seattle when she was alive too, when every other Duwamish was forced to leave. She keeps the ghost company, or they keep her company. She was famous for making baskets, and people traded Princess Angeline postcards. She was named Princess Angeline by a white lady who wanted people to know she wasn't like the other Indians. She was special. I like to call her by her other name, the name the white lady didn't think was so pretty, Kiki Soblu. I think it's beautiful. You probably heard about that speech Kiki Soblu's father, Chief Self, spoke in Lachute Seed, and he spoke for a long, long, long time. Who knows what all he said? What was reported is considered fiction because we all know white people lie, but someone wrote something down and it sounds true. He said, or might have said, "The dead have power, and the white people will never be alone because our ghosts love this land, and our love will haunt every piece of it." Okay then, what will we do? Well, I get lonely sometimes. I visit Kiki Soblu, daughter to daughter, ghost to ghost. I came to see you, Snoweets. I was lonely. I brought you presents. What the hell does Snoweets mean? Don't you get the Klamath Word of the Day newsletter? I don't have time to read that poo mess. Where are you? I can't see you. I'm right here. But anyway, you don't have to. I'll sing to you. Anawana K-I, Anawana K-I, ay-ay-ay-ay, ay-ay-ay-ay, ay-ay, Anawana K-9. Oh, that's nice. That's a salmon song? Well, I just made it up. I brought you a picture. You want to take a picture? I can't see. Well, if you can't see, I won't leave the picture. I have more gifts. Sweets, I have a question. Okay, that's good. I know why I was left behind. Why did you stay behind by yourself? I was never the only one. They love to count Indians on one finger. Oh, you mean this finger? I have something for you. Oh, good. A time machine. We always say we're going to make one. Well, now you don't have to. That's a cool present. Because I know you want things. I do. I like wanting things and non-things too. Well, where should we go and when should we go? You want to leave now? It's all the same, and I want to visit. Maybe the Warwick? How do we do this? Well, I don't see it. Is it an invisible time machine? You have to go outside. Well, I thought you couldn't see. You know I'm a ghost. You know you are still a ghost. I know. Monster.
I know.
Bad smell.
I know.
Dream after. I know. You break things.
I know.
Your grandchildren are always still thinking about you.
I know, Snoweets. We love you.
I don't have children, stupid ghost. I know. We won't stay long, Kiki So Blue. We have other things to do.
So that was the sound piece. It did live on a wall with headphones and postcards. Postcards because Edward Curtis, he's famous for creating thousands of images of North American Indians, a lot of which he staged. He asked them to dress up in very romantic, kind of what he imagined Indians to be. So he actually edited out things like clocks or baseball caps that they wanted to wear. And his very first photograph ever was of Princess Angeline or Kiki So Blue. And he turned into postcard. Back then, postcards were a hot business. So we made our own postcard. For this piece, we were invited for one night to do a performance, which you see here. And we did incorporate certain gestures as the sound was playing. One was gifts dropping out of Lady House skirt. Another was somatic gestures, which is part of a kind of a mind-body trauma healing practice, and with which we involve the audience.
So since about 2020, we've been working on a separate series of projects that we call Bereavement. And it first started when Marie actually brought us an article about beavers becoming a nuisance in San Diego, actually, after they had flooded a rifle range at Camp Pendleton, which I'm sure you all know of, which is a military training facility. And as we began to learn more about that site, we, of course, had learned about the indigenous presence and dispossession on that land. And then we also learned that it was also one of the largest staging and relocation sites for Vietnamese refugees after the war. And so what was interesting is that this removal and relocation of the beavers actually paralleled the histories of Indigenous and Asian folks on that land. And like us, the beavers persisted and returned and wreaked havoc on this imperial space of violence. And so we really entered into this question of, what do these beavers have to teach us? And as we began to really listen and enter into this interspecies kind of listening and relationship with them, COVID had taken over our lives. There was this global and individual grief that really manifested in an embodied and visceral and abstract way. So we just were wading through all of that and really trying to presence our ancestors. And then there was this resurgence, right, of anti-Asian violence, which is still ongoing across the nation, particularly in the Bay Area in California and in New York. And that's about the time that the murders in Georgia had happened as well, too. So it was within this really intense milieu that this work emerged. It became a vehicle for us to explore all of these different themes. And it was interesting because these themes were very intertwined with the history of the beaver itself. And as we began to learn more about it, the beaver fur trade was essentially the economy that enabled westward expansion of the US. It really was undergirded by settler colonialism. It perpetuated and bolstered racial capitalism and really entrenched these extractive economies that the nation was built on. And, we learned actually metaphorically and also materially that beavers became to symbolize wealth because the top hat at the time was made of beaver fur. And of course, the top hat back then was really this symbol of the ultra capitalist, high earning, high net worth individual. And so we sat with all of that. And then we learned about beaver relocation via parachuting, actually, in Idaho. And so this is actually what you see on screen right now. And for context, in the post-World War II era in Idaho, beavers in this one particular area were becoming a quote-unquote nuisance because they were damaging agricultural infrastructure. And so initially, the Idaho Fish and Game Department tried to relocate those beavers via mule because there was such a high loss of life, of beaver life, I should say, and the high cost. They actually had to think of something else to get rid of them. And so in 1948, this guy named Elmo Heater had thought of the idea of parachuting these beavers out of a plane to a different area. And at first, he had created these woven wooden boxes, but then the beavers would chew out of that really quickly. And so he actually designed this other box that you see on screen that was designed to drop and then open. And he tested that box on this beaver, which he named Geronimo, multiple times. And in 1948, the Idaho Fish and Game Department essentially relocated 76 beavers from the McCall and Payette Lake region to the Chamberlain Basin. And it was rumored that Geronimo was very happy because he was a single male amongst a group of females. So it was interesting, not only the name Geronimo really calling back to indigenous histories of dispossession, but also this weird heteronormativity that was being placed onto this beaver. So we thought we had to do something with it. And in particular, because today the beaver is now being heralded as like nature's engineer and really being called back to try to mitigate human impact on our land. And they're being brought back to create habitats for other animals, reduce flash flood risk, etc. So you're like, how do we make some work out of this? Because the beaver in and of itself really intertwine these concepts and histories that we were really interested in about manifest destiny, military strategies, being unmanageable, these uncanny histories, parallel histories to like Asian indigenous dispossession and violence. And there's something really spectacular about the beaver in terms of like how we imagine it doing otherwise. So yeah, this is just an image of the box actually being dropped out of the airplane. And to the right is actually a schematic of the beaver box with the measurements of it. And this is our first manifestation at the YBCA that you might know in California.
Thanks, Sam. So yeah, it was such a crazy thing to discover. So I think this is just proof that if you ever feel like you have this weird spidey sense tingling and you want to chase a rabbit down a rabbit hole, chase it. So for us, we chased a beaver down a beaver hole. And we didn't know, but the more we chased it, we found, first it was eco-saviors, and then we found parachuting beavers. And then we found out Geronimo. So it's sort of the universe speaking to you in a way. We did get invited to do a show at the YBCA that got derailed by COVID. Eventually we were able to do this kind of public viewing, which turned out to be even better. We are a little short on time, so I just want to quickly say, we decided this idea of presence, persistence became really relevant, not just for pests like beavers, so-called pests, but also pandemics. And Lady Howe, I don't know if you can see her, but in the front door of this room, she's pointing. And Lady Howe often points. Sometimes we're not sure why. She's warning us to something we can't see, or she's invoking or presencing something out of view. So that's kind of briefly the installation for that show. We did also make a video for that show. We found the original Idaho Fish and Game promotional video that was made over 60 years ago. It was called Furs for the Future. We were going to show the whole thing, but I think because we're out of time, I'll just let you, these are a few film stills. You'll see that original beaver box that landed. These were actually surplus military parachutes, which kind of shows to the persistence of military supplies and relocation. We took, there's a voiceover that talks about this really like it's like Leave It to Beaver. Oh my gosh, that's so weird. It's like the Leave It to Beaver voiceover where it's like, Mr. Beaver is so happy to be relocated. And we actually inserted sounds of the beavers that sounded the most like blood-sucking zombies as possible to disrupt this idea of the happy beaver. And then these scenes of hands like sort of deliciously, evilly massaging the fur seemed to us like really the uncanny truth underneath the sort of happy utopic voiceover. So what we did to intervene on it, one of the things we did was take that clip and extend and prolong that clip to sort of suggest maybe other truths that they weren't even aware of, that they were communicating. So we'll skip the video, and then Sam can talk about the installation we ended up doing in Minnesota.
Yeah, so this is our show called Super Furs for the Super Future, 77 : Beaverment. And this is a show about the 76 beavers who were relocated by parachute, like I mentioned before, and the 77th beaver who we will never know. And just wanted to mention that that 77th beaver to us is a beaver that we imagine that escaped from the box or flew away, and is really a placeholder for our vision and framework around futurity. And so just wanted to note that here, but generally what the show was about was what we're calling the 5 stages of bereavement, which include memory, love through loss, which is Shilyeon in Korean, revenge, recognition, and refusal. And it was really important to us to have these elements given the context that we're in at the time with COVID, and also with the anti-Asian violence. And so the memory, the different elements of bereavement are represented in different objects in the gallery. So the water represents memory, because as Toni Morrison says, all water has a perfect memory and is forever trying to get back to where it was. Shilyeon, love through loss, is represented by this Taeyong song, actually, hence why we were playing it at the beginning. And it was Angie's really brilliant idea to bring K-pop into art gallery to really be a symbol of not only heartbreak, but also the love that we have for each other as Korean Americans and indigenous people in our group, but also the solidarity that we feel with Asians across the US. Revenge is really represented by that burlap black sack that you see, which is supposed to be the specularity taking revenge on what is actually these invasive colonial plants that are in the bag and also on top of it. And then the box is actually a beaver box that has traveled through the specularity and has been transformed by it, with holes that reference glory holes. And then not pictured here is a mirror for recognition. And I should mention that the box itself is symbolizing refusal.
This was another extension of bereavement. It was curated by our friend Thea Correa Tegel. Tegel Correa? Did I do it wrong? Feral Intimacies, Part 1. And so in this, we do an online zine for Art Journal Open, and you can still visit it there. Since we are out of time, I would just suggest looking at it at your leisure. It's it has some writing that I did about my son, and both of these were in part dedicated to my son. He was 21 last year when he was killed. He was selling weed, and these 2 girls tried to rob him, and they stabbed him, and he died. And so it was very sudden. I also think that this work, this bereavement, an unexpected part of it that that has meant so much to me and is continuing to sort of inspire whatever I'm doing now is how do we, I never resonated with Stop Asian Hate. Sounds like Asians be hating. And so what I like to think about is how do we support and love like our communities that are under threat of so much violence, and also that have been allies for so many of us for so long without that really being recognized enough. It never has been recognized enough in my mind. So so that's something I've been brainstorming a lot too. And if it helps you to listen to K-pop, then that's a big part of it. But there's got to be ways that that we can support Asian American communities that have not been explored, and that's something I'm interested in a lot.
So this is our last slide, and we wanted to close with another quote, just because we feel like it really also encapsulates our work. I'll just read it now, and it goes, "When I said I will probably haunt you, you made it about you, but it is about me. I'm preparing my future haunting, a haunting born and unmoored from horror, before and beyond dispossession, a stateless and constant form of passage, a passage that is always passing, a shady sort of sovereignty. What do ghosts do when they aren't haunting? Go to outer space, make lists, window shop, visit friends, prank, be bored, haunt other ghosts." And with that, we just want to give you a big thanks. Our website is www.superfutures.art. You can find us on IG at Haunt Collective, and happy to open it up to questions or reactions or comments.
Thank you for that incredible presentation. There's so many things that I think resonated so deeply, and my skin was constantly getting goosebumps throughout. So thank you for sharing your work. Reminder for everyone to please submit any questions or comments or thoughts that you have into the Q&A. We're more than happy to get to those. Early on, Jared had a question around the naming of the avatars and the process of arriving to that. And I think that I also had students learn a little bit about your work, and a few questions came up around just this notion of the avatar. And you spoke a little bit about the inspiration behind each one, but maybe if you could speak about how you arrived at naming them and kind of arrived at the purpose and the function of each of those for each one of you.
I can start. That's such a good question. I don't think we've ever been asked that. So I love that this is the question. For me, Agent O was both like a combination of Agent Orange, which in some ways was an agent of so much violence in the Vietnam War, or as they call it in Vietnam, the American War. But also I was really interested in the etymology of O. So I did write an appendix of the letter O, and its kind of resonance with the number 0. I looked into kind of the journey of the number 0 and its like convergence with the letter O. Again, this is about chasing rabbits down rabbit holes and seeing what happens. And it turns out the number 0 was like a very big mathematical breakthrough, and it happened simultaneously. They can't tell exactly who discovered it, but simultaneously the Olmecs and somewhere in Mesopotamia. And I think there's a Mayan glyph for the placeholder 0, which is unlike any of the other numerical glyphs. 1, 2, 3, and 4 are like dots and lines, but for the number 0, it's actually a shell. And the glyph of a shell gestures to both a presence through absence. And then in Arabic, the number for 0 is actually cipher, which is very much like cipher or puzzle. And so those things really kind of converged into this idea of O. kind of concurrent with that, I was really obsessed with the Cyclops and that single eye. And so that O became for me a rewriting of that Cyclops myth, not as the monster that terrorized Odysseus, but actually as a victim of Greek expansion, whose island was taken over by Odysseus and whose resources were stolen and eaten and then rewritten through Greek mythology as some sort of heroic thing. So that's a lot of O right there, but that's why.
Agent O made up the visor. It's something she brought back from her visits to Korea. Something aunties wear, Ajima, they wear these visors, and but when Agent O put it on, it was scary. And it also just signified for me refusal to, like, you don't know me, you can't see me. And it gave us a bit of a mask, you know, to wear. And we've considered other masks, and we love other masks, but nothing else has fit quite as well. We have a little bug mask that we wore for some of our time at Franconia. And but I do love that these masks are like gear, you know, like old lady gear, you know. Cool.
Yeah, so that was Sam, did you have something you wanted to
I just wanted to
contribute
add, the mask has really changed for us in the time of COVID. Before it was kind of a secret love language to a certain group of people that wear masks, and now it's much more common. Sam and Angie, their avatars have a W in them that I adore. I don't know if either of you want to speak to what the presence of that W.
Well, I just to explain like specularity, fugitive alterity part, I have been thinking about different ways in which I myself can make sense of legacies of violence that I've experienced and that really are constitutive of like my people, like Korean people's history. And so I was like wrestling with this term like specular, like being different, and like it means also like of having like properties of a mirror. And so it was just an interesting word to play with, because I really do believe in like recognition and seeing myself in other people, and seeing a common link between all of us. And then I thought of like specularity just because it's like just felt different and wayward and not defined, which I felt like me as like a queer person, it just had different like the similar resonances with like my embodied sense of myself. And so I was thinking about that, and then I was like, but alterity is also a great word too. And then I really love this like theory and way of being around like fugitivity, like stealing from the commons for the undercommons, making a way out of no way, and just being on the margins and making something generative, outside of the structures that you were never really meant to be included in or survive within. So it really meant, I was trying to explore a different way of being, right, within this monstrous place, that had elements of all of these words. And then Lady Howe came up with it first, like or whatever, but I was like, yeah, and I'm like taking myself so seriously. So like, let's make sure that we're always grounding ourselves in joy and whatever. Like it's not always that serious, you know.
Yeah, haunting's my shit, and I get tired. So I was just like, haunting or whatever, Lady Howe, sounds good. It really, for me, like Sam and Rhea, and I was like, there's times I just go, that's a lot of thinking, and like I already got a PhD, so I'm gonna take a pass on this one.
Yeah, so we have another question that came in from Catherine. Wants to know how you all became interested in ghosts and the afterlife, if that was something that preceded the work that you all did together, or is it something that kind of intensified because of the collaboration? and that Agent O mentioned her previous interest in Vietnamese psychics, but ghosts are another level. Catherine mentioned. So yeah, this was something also that came up, just this perhaps like this balancing around like research and different forms of research, but then opening up to these other forms of inspiration or dialogue and conversation that aren't rooted, I guess, in traditional forms of like what we know as research. So yeah, if you can maybe speak a little bit to that.
Well, I'm teaching a class next term at University of Oregon on haunting and horror films, but a lot of it's going to be referencing all kinds of like haunting within the university. To me, haunting is something that students really resonate with, that many people can relate to, and that frankly, like, I don't know, when I went to grad school, I just thought I was going to die. And this woman came over to give me a massage, and she said, "There's a woman standing in the corner and she's holding her throat and she wants you to speak for her." I was like, yeah, that's my grandma who died when I was a baby. And I mean, it's when you're Native, you're never alone. And I don't think any of y'all are either, but it's just, you know, it's kind of like more normal. And she'd poke me behind and I'd be like, I know I'm supposed to do this stuff. And so I think haunting though, like even as a kid, I felt really haunted by the Modoc War and by this idea that all the Indians were gone and my tribe had been terminated. So it's just something that, like, when I found academic language for it, I was like, sign me up, eureka, here we go. You know, you get that pass and you're like, I'm taking this train all the way down the line. It just made sense.
Yeah, I this is why I adore the W in SFAOW and Lady Howe, because the W captures so much about our project, not just being about, you know, trauma and an identity through trauma, but all these other parts of our humanity and our coexistence. I'm sure you've all heard about the book Minor Feelings, but I think that's like the first time we're starting to really think about emotions and subjectivities that aren't like these really epic grand narratives also, and how those exist, even if they feel very sublimated. So the W to me is also that. At the time, to me, psychics and haunting went very hand in hand. I know the question was like, it seems like they're different levels. Because I was really interested in the Cassandra myth. In Greek myth, Cassandra is a captive from a war, and she's also psychic, and she keeps telling the future and nobody listens. And there's a way to me that hauntings are very similar. There are these unresolved violences that society won't listen to, and it's this lack of recognition and lack of like attempt to really recognize this, that sort of fuels haunting, but also is the fuel for psychics. So to me, they were very hand in hand.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think one of the things that I'm going to be taking away is just like this really beautiful radical shift in how haunting is usually understood as something, and you spoke about this, right? Like something negative, something that is malicious, to a sense of haunting because of love and because of wanting to be close and to remain close and to sustain connection. I felt like that was such a beautiful way of understanding that as a practice. And I think that you also spoke about solidarity. And I think you all really embody that through this collaboration. And it's a question that came up for a few of my students. Isidora, for example, writes, "I find the work you all do is great and an amazing way of reminding people about the land they are on. The people may try to forget, but the land never will, and this land was never the land of colonizers to begin with. The connection they create with what is and what was is also beautiful." And she was curious specifically around potential collaborations with other Indigenous peoples, and if that has been an aspect of your work. And then Chloe and Mackenzie both just wanted to know, essentially, you know, how to be better and how to be in solidarity in ways that are significant in terms of the work and the kind of practices of resilience of Indigenous peoples, and to overall just kind of how we can contribute to building more livable futures. So I don't know if you could maybe speak a little bit to this notion of solidarity and maybe ways of being in solidarity and how that could be shared with students.
Hey, I just shared a link because my cousin Natalie Ball has this project about Klamath land back that she's like really gung ho, and she's trying to she's build like settlers down in Chiloquin, Oregon, and she's trying to buy the land back. She says the tribe's not moving fast enough, and if at all or whatever. And I just feel like solidarity and is all about relationships, you know, and you can't be in relationship with people who don't want to be in relationship with you. Something I've been learning a lot about lately. As I just recently moved and started a new job and stuff. And I think that that we all don't have to be in agreement, you know, about what's ideal. I know that the settlers are freaking out because Natalie's bought like these bulletin boards and stuff, and there's not a decolonized future. Well, I like to think about the fact that we don't know what that looks like, even as we move towards it, right? But I don't imagine people getting back on boats, or, I mean, maybe we could create some garbage islands or something of all the stuff in the Pacific. I don't know, but I mean, we're here together, you know, but there's different kinds of justices. And I just feel like we all have to be open to exploring them and not killing each other, you know? But I don't think that everyone's interested in having those conversations, right? So what do we do about that? I know that you can't educate some people out of their hatred. I don't know.
Yeah, I think on the solidarity tip, Angie had mentioned this really briefly when she talked about the Black Winter at UC San Diego when we met. But that was a time when there was a lot of anti-Black racism happening on campus. And I was an undergrad at the time, and me and my colleagues had actually organized a lot of the responses to that and essentially shut down the campus for a while, which was awesome. And, you know, like we showed up for each other across race and gender and lines of sexual orientation and difference generally. Because obviously it was important to do so, but it was really because we loved each other. And I think from that experience, you know, it was kind of like when Tumblr activism was coming online, and there's a lot of conversations about like how to be a good ally or be in like solidarity in ways that really, I think, were exacting and like undergirded by perfectionism. And it really is just about, at the end of the day, like showing up for people you care about and like really being with them, learning and listening to them when they're like in pain, and being together when we're happy and celebrating together. And you know, most memorable times of that experience was like, yeah, eating and like just talking shit or like whatever. And so I think like that was a real important lesson for me. And I think as we were going through COVID and obviously like the losses that we all had experienced as a society, but also individually, I think the same principle really applied to us. It's like, how do we show our love and care? And I think we were lucky enough to have a strong container within our collective to hold all of that, and also an important channel through art to share that with the world. And so, yeah, we haven't figured it out, like, but I think that's how we, or at least I, you know, approach solidarity work within this collective.
Awesome. So maybe just the last question, because I know we're running short on time. Jorge just asked a simple question that I think is very resonant, and I think relates maybe to this conversation that we're just having. But he wanted to know how can we see hope for the future in the midst of everything that's happening. So I was just curious to see some of the areas in which you see hope for the future, and how you do that in your own work. I should say if you do also, because also it's fair to not be so like it's gonna be okay. Maybe it's not. But yeah, if any of you have any thoughts around that.
I do. I think that I think the future seems terrifying, and yet look at how much things have changed. Like not always in bad ways. Like I feel so great about. So I'm 56 years old, but the last few years I've been working so much with high school kids, and like they're so down. Like they have it. They're just like this is their world, and they want to keep it, and they have such good politics, and they understand some things about community. Like one of the things that people did in Portland was like morning prayer rituals, like just to be in solidarity with each other outside because we couldn't be together, but like just really beautiful stuff like that. And it's scary. There's a lot of murders in our city right now, or Portland, where I was, and the world just feels, especially with the fires that we've had the past, it's all pretty terrifying. And we lived through Trump, and Biden is like a limp something or whatever. I wasn't going to say that. I was thinking of like a sock.
Sure.
But anyway, I guess that I see that the elders I know haven't given up, and the kids I know haven't given up, and how can I? Ree has a son, Junobi, and I just think that there has to be a world for him to be in, and that the possibilities of decolonization and decolonizing futures to me seem very hopeful. I don't know why. I just think we can do it. I don't know. I'm building a spaceship. I'm gonna go be a colonizer.
I really appreciate this question. So I am a teacher in this politicized healing modality called generative somatics, which understands that the traumas and the things that we go through are not just something that happen to us, but gets embedded within our actual body. And because of that, there's a way to undo that trauma, right? And so I think I came to that work after being an organizer, trying to like change the world that way, which I think at the end of the day, like direct action organizing will get us the world that we need. But I came to somatics after being really burnt out, and I think having a visceral understanding of what self-love felt like in my body. And like last year, like I had this whole somatic experience of like, understanding my sovereignty over my life, and which is like so deeply decolonial, like having to undo the narratives that the lie of white supremacy has put into my body. I was like, this is part of my freedom. And even yesterday I had a session, and it's like, I felt trust in other people for the first time since I was in 6th grade. And so like knowing myself that I can feel these things again, and seeing other people go through like similar like embodied forms of transformation, I'm like, we as a collective can do this too. And so that's what gives me hope.
I'll just add one last thing to all the beautiful words that were said, was that I remember when Trump was elected and I had to teach the next day, and everyone was like, what are you gonna say to your class? And it was rough, and I sought guidance and really took heart from the idea that, you know, in these kind of darkest times, people actually mobilize even more. So prior to Trump, I think people were a little complacent. And then after we saw these incredible kind of mass mobilizations in a scale I never ever dreamed possible, including like K-pop fans like shutting down the Tulsa pep rally and like flooding hashtags and all that kind of stuff. So that sort of creativity and life force really gives me hope.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your hope, and I think this work gives me hope too. So thank you for contributing to that and inviting us to imagine, yeah, better futures, more livable futures, and how we might get there. So thank you so much. Greatly appreciate all your time and generosity in sharing your work. And yeah, I think thank you everyone also for joining us for tonight's session. We're going to be kind of continuing this next week. Then we have spring break and then some other sessions in the future. So please keep an eye on your email for further sessions. And yes, thank you again, Super Future Sound Collective, for joining us.
Blast. Thank you so much. Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And
thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Students who are in my class, if you want to stick around for just a sec to just briefly connect, and everyone else, thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you next week.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.